And with that, Bodhichitta in our hearts and minds, we do the verse of refuge in Bodhichitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Good to see everybody. So let's see. In the text, we're picking up on the top of page 11. Yeah, page 11. And just to kind of catch us, review just for a second. So, right, we're on the we covered direct valid cognizers, and then we're in a section on facsimiles of direct perceivers, right? I had mentioned last time, I thought that these terms are really helpful, I think, to think about, so one is, especially the conceptual, right? The conceptual facsimiles of direct perceivers, which we covered last time, right? Meaning that our concepts, what's the word? Our facsimile of, which means appear like but are not objects of direct perception. And that the fact that we mistake those, right, is important. Yeah, and that remember, also just want to remind everybody that some of our direct perceivers, while they're all mistaken, right, in the sense that they appear to be the thing but are not the thing, they're not all wrong consciousnesses, right? In other words, some of them are wrong consciousnesses. They don't, in the sense that they're wrong about not only their appearing object, but their object of engagement, right? The thing they're trying to get at. So some are correct about their object of engagement, right? And some are totally wrong, and some are totally wrong consciousness, which are totally wrong about the object of engagement. So both of those are possible. So now we're up to non-conceptual facsimiles of direct perceivers, and that's what starts on page 11. And so what's a non-conceptual facsimile of a direct perceiver? Because remember, I want to go back and remind people, like a direct perceiver was, the definition, which is on page 5, was a knower that is free from conceptuality and non-mistaken. So that's a direct perceiver. So a facsimile of a direct perceiver is also free from conceptuality, right? Because by definition, right, it says a non-conceptual means free from conceptuality. So, but as we're going to see here, it's got to be that the part of the definition it's not going to meet is the non-mistaken, right? So, yeah, so that's the issue, is that so these are direct perceivers that are mistaken consciousnesses, and so they're not. Therefore, they're not. I mean, they're non-conceptual, so they're not. So that's why they're facsimiles of direct perceivers. I just said it wrong. They're not actual direct perceivers. They're facsimiles, and the reason they're facsimiles is that they're wrong consciousnesses. And so Pervachoke says here, there are many non-conceptual facsimiles of a direct perceiver. From among the two non-conceptuals of direct, so that he begins by categorizing them into two types of consciousness. There are those that are mental consciousness, and there are those that are sense consciousnesses. And then he says something which the commentaries I thought were just kind of intriguing about. Then he says, An illustration of the first was explained above, meaning an illustration of mental consciousness was explained above. And I was going, where was that explained? And then I looked and saw that the two, Perpachoke was a great Gelugpa Lama. He was one of the tutors of the great 13th Dalai Lama. So he's a very respected scholar. But anyway, I couldn't find it. And then I looked in the two Gelugpa Geshe's commentaries, and they said they couldn't find it either. That they think he made an error probably, and it's actually explained below, not above. So maybe that is an error in the actual Tibetan. There are going to be, if we get that far, there are going to be 2 points like that today that seem to be Perpachoke making small errors, which I think are useful in the sense of, I said this before, I think sometimes when texts like this have something like that, it makes you think, like, well, what's going on? But anyway, so the example that's given, that he doesn't give here, but that he gives later in the text, of a mental consciousness that would be a facsimile of a direct perceiver, would be a dream consciousness. So the example he gives is a dream consciousness that sees something blue, sees blue. And the reason why it's so in other words, and the reason the commentary explains, right? Because a dream consciousness is, perceiving blue is non-conceptual. It's a mental consciousness because all dream consciousnesses are mental consciousness, because in a dream, when we're dreaming, our sense consciousnesses are suspended, that they're not functioning. So we don't, when we're actually dreaming, we're not seeing, hearing, tasting, and so on. So the example that's given would be that, would be a dream consciousness that sees blue, and it's mistaken because it's not, there's no blue actually there. If you had a dream of a truck or something, there's no actual truck there, so it's mistaken with regards to the object of engagement, because the dream seems to be perceiving a truck. In the dream you seem to be perceiving a truck, but there's no actual truck there at all, not even conventionally, right? It's just a dream. So that would be an example of a non-conceptual facsimile of a direct perceiver. So according to the commentaries. And then he focuses mainly on sense consciousnesses here that are facsimiles of direct perceivers. So he says, with regards to the second, non-conceptual facsimiles of direct perceiver that are sense conscious, there are 4 types, right? Where there's a cause of error existing in the basis, a cause of error existing in the abode, a cause of error existing in the object, and a cause of error existing in the immediately preceding condition. I just want to remind everybody why is he covering this? So he's covering these to point out that, first of all, there are many different examples of how we perceive, right? He's getting at all the different ways we perceive and know. And these are examples of ways in which we know that are incorrect. One other small point I want to make, because it comes up over and over again, I think, as we go along here, and I've mentioned this before, but I'll keep mentioning it, is part of, I think, also what's being gotten at that's just intriguing to think about, is that, let's say it right, we generally, it's hard, let me say it this way, that it's really hard to differentiate when we're having a wrong, when we're wrong, like, it's actually, it's a joke. It's easy to know when other people are having wrong consciousnesses, and it's really hard to know when we're having wrong consciousnesses, isn't it? He passed away, so but I had a Tibetan friend who was older who used to say, he had a Tibetan, I didn't know this, but it was like a common Tibetan saying among Tibetan lay people. But he said, when you point at somebody else, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you, was how he put it. And he was getting at this point. It was his way of jokingly saying, when we look at somebody else's faults, there are 3, we're missing the 3 faults that we ourselves are. We're not noticing the 3 faults that we ourselves have. And so what he's getting at, particularly but this here, we're getting at is that we don't recognize our own faults in terms of our ways of knowing, right? And it's true, isn't it? Like they say that in one of the commentaries I was reading yesterday, it was saying, it was in the later section, it was a commentary on inferential knowers, but it was saying like that whatever we believe, we really believe it, even if it's wrong, and it's hard to change our beliefs. Anyway, So this is getting at all the different ways we know things so that we can start to notice when we're incorrect. So the first, where the cause of error exists in the basis, and he gives the example, if you have an eye impaired by an obscuring disease that sees one moon as two, right? But so this would give, I mean, the example here would be, right, like, there are countless examples of this though, right? Like, so it's where your basis, meaning your own organs or sense bases are impaired, right? And that's like, so somebody says, oh, you're being too quiet when they're having a hearing problem, right? Like, so let's say if I had a hearing problem and I say, oh, speak up, you're not talking loud enough, right? I think that the sound is too low. It's actually the actual problem is in the basis, right? Here an eye disease. So if you see, they often use the example, if you see floaters, right? They say, the floaters aren't there. It's the cause is in your eye consciousness. Or eye sense, right? Eye organ in that case, sorry. So that's one cause of error, right? Is where there's something going on in your own body, basically, that causes an error in how so it's a facsimile of direct perceiver in the sense that it appears, right? Like if you say, oh, you're talking too low, speak up, when you have an ear infection, right? Let's say, you think the problem is in the side of the object, but it's actually coming from the side of your own basis. The second type of cause of error is existing in the abode. Give the example, if you were sitting in a boat or if you're on a train or something, and it looks like trees are moving, right? So the example there is, something about where you're at physically when you're perceiving something is impairing, is causing you to perceive an object incorrectly. The third is where the cause of error exists in the object. And then it gives the example of if you were holding a stick of incense and you moved it like this, it would look like there's a circle, right? In space, but there's no circle there. And actually, like, let's just say, right, magic trick, magic tricks work this way, don't they? In other words, that there's a recognition by the part of an illusionist or a magician or whoever, right, that our sense powers can be fooled, right? And so, they use that capacity for the sense powers to be fooled to make a trick, right? Anyway, so and there are many examples, right, where it's from the side of the object, where something appears one way, but it's because of how our senses relate to that kind of phenomenon. And the fourth is where the cause of error exists in the immediately preceding condition. An example here is where somebody, this actually happens, doesn't it? Where somebody's mind is so overwhelmed with rage or hatred, it says here, that things look red, right? That literally the world goes red for them. But of course the world isn't red. So they would say, oh, everything looked red, what happened? But what happened wasn't in the world, it was in their own body, right? And there, it's an immediately preceding circumstance that shifts their ability to, or impairs their ability rather, to perceive things accurately, or our ability, I say there, our ability. And then he makes a point here. He says, so non-conceptual wrong consciousness, non-conceptual facsimile of a direct perceiver, and consciousness that has a clear appearance of a non-existent are synonymous. And I just think those are, you can contemplate those terms, right? So it's a non-conceptual wrong consciousness. But I like this last one, a consciousness that has a clear appearance of a non-existent. Right? So it's a non-conceptual consciousness that has a clear appearance, but what's appearing to it is a non-existent thing. So he says those are all synonyms. Those are all ways of getting at this same phenomenon. Then Sujata has her hand up.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm really confused about non-conceptual and the sense consciousnesses. So I was hanging on, and when we were talking about like the truck in the dream, or dreaming that something's blue, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's non-conceptual, and then when we got to like eye consciousness, I'm having trouble understanding how I think I'm so confused that I don't even understand my question. I'm so sorry. But how so in the dream situation, it's not your actual eye consciousness that is engaging, right? So maybe I've got maybe I'm thinking of the dream stuff applying to too much of this. Even in non-conceptual, I don't know. I think maybe it'll become more clear to me as you continue to talk.
Well, I'll remind one point I'll quickly make. I don't know if this will help or not, but I'll just say it quickly. Is I just remind people, remind us what, because actually I wrote this down to bring it up anyway. So I'll mention a few points about that. So one is sort of just to remember. So whether we're talking about, because these are non-conceptual facsimiles of direct perceivers, which are or another, and which again are non-conceptual wrong consciousnesses, or non-conceptual consciousnesses to which have a clear appearance of a non-existent phenomena, or a non-existent rather. I want to remind us one thing. One thing is, what is a concept? Just remember, what's the definition of a conceptual consciousness? Right? Because we have to remember, in order to understand non-conceptual, we have to remember what is conceptual. And so there are different I mean, all these definitions are extremely similar, but I wrote down one from one of the texts. So a conceptual consciousness is a determinative knower which apprehends a sound generality and a meaning generality as suitable to be mixed. And by the way, so determinative knower, only conceptual consciousnesses are determinative knowers. Let's remind this. And a determinative knower is something that knows by way of elimination. And it knows a generally characterized phenomena, according to the Tantrika tenet system. So, like, in other words, and that's like when a child is learning what's a cup, right? They have to be able to understand that a cup's not a bowl and a cup's not a plate, right? They have to be able to eliminate other things and go, oh, okay, that's a cup. And at first, like a child, actually, it happens, doesn't it? Sometimes a child might, if a child doesn't know these things well and you show them a bowl, they might think, a very young child, they might think it's a cup, right? And they have to go, no, that's not a cup, that's a bowl. This is a cup, and I remember when I first got to know Tibetans, that some of what they called a cup, I thought was a bowl because it's shaped like, it has a different shape. And then they had to correct me. I go, oh no, that's not it. That's a cup. That's what we put tea in. It's not where we put our soup. And I go, oh, okay. It's the shape, but it's like, it's like wider than most of cups that I grew up with. So my point is, so it's a determinative knower means that it knows by way of elimination. And it knows by way of a mental image, and so it's a determinative knower which apprehends a sound generality, so a name, right, or term, and a meaning generality, meaning a mental image, as suitable to be mixed, right? So it's saying, oh, that's a cup, right? So you have an image of a cup, a mental image of a cup, and a label, and that's a conceptual knower. And so what this is pointing, so in terms of the non-conceptual, right? So the easy one is the sense consciousnesses, right? In other words, so if you're using my example, a person who has, let's say, has a ear infection, and their friend is talking to them, and they hear some sound, but they can't quite make it out, and they say, "Oh, you're talking too low," right? The ear consciousness that's hearing the sound is a non-conceptual knower. It's actually, it's a direct perceiver. It's not a direct perceiver. It's a facsimile of a direct perceiver, but it's by way of the ear sense power, right? And so that's clearly non-conceptual. The harder one, of course, is the dream, and to think through. And I'll say, I'll actually I wrote down what one of the Geshe's commentaries on this, because he said there are many debates in the monastery about the nature of dreams, that they often debate about that, which I've not been present for those debates ever, but so this is this is the position that they take, is that that it's kind of subtle, actually. They were saying a dream, how to say this right? They said first of all, they define what a dream consciousness is. Not all sleep at one point he was making is not all sleep consciousnesses are dream consciousnesses, but that a dream consciousness is a consciousness that's actively dreaming. That was one point they made. And then they were saying that at the time when a person is actively dreaming, the sense consciousness, well, this is trashy. I mean, this is well known, right? I mean, that's why we, that whole thing when you, sometimes when you're falling asleep and your body like kind of jerks, it's because it's right? The part of your brain that connects to movement and so on is shutting down, right? So that you won't punch somebody if you're moving your arm as you're sleeping, hopefully. things like that, right? You'll get up and run if you're running away in the dream. So anyway, our sense powers as we're dreaming stop, as we go into deep sleep, actually stop functioning. So one point is that they make is a dream consciousness does not make use of the sense powers. So therefore it's not a sense, it's not, or is dream consciousness or mental consciousness is not sense consciousness, because the sense powers are no longer functioning when we're dreaming. That's one point they make. Then they say, so it's always a mental consciousness. Then they say, I'm trying to go here. It's a non-conceptual, I wrote this down instead of just because I want to kind of clarify it. It's a non-conceptual knower, or it's non-conceptual because it's not a determinative knower that apprehends a sound generality and a meaning generality is simply mixed, right? And what that means is that, and they made a couple of points actually, which I'll share. One is that determinative knower, according to the school's debates, one point is this, is that conceptual consciousness are gross consciousnesses where dream consciousnesses are generally subtle. But another point that they make here is that, let's see, third way, like when the mental consciousness of a dream sees blue, it's not, as they said here, it's not a determinative knower that's apprehending a sound generality and a meaning generality mixed. Rather, it's more simple. It's just a mental conscious perceiving blue, and so that's the way they describe that point. So it's not a conceptual knower, and then you have to go back to what's the definition of a conceptual knower, right? Yeah, so I'll leave it at that because that's what they actually say. And then the last point is, and it's a wrong consciousness because I just wrote down my own example here, that if I dream of seeing a car, right? It's a wrong consciousness that's a non-conceptual facsimile of a direct perceiver, because the mental consciousness of the dream perceives a car, but there's no car there. So in that sense, it's a wrong consciousness, right? When you wake up, you realize, oh, I thought my car had gotten broken into. I don't even have that car, so it's a wrong consciousness in that sense. So that's what they say about that. Rahi, yes, I think she had her hand up first.
Lauren, so when we're dreaming, if the sensory awareness is not operating, then when we, are startled or see things or feel things, and it's supposed to be just mental consciousness, how do they explain that?
You mean like if you then hear a sound and woke up?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah. No, they would say that's not the dreaming consciousness. In other words, what they would say is that's something was loud enough, it sort of it engaged your sense consciousness, but that's no longer the dreaming conscious. That's then that's pulling you out. And then there was that like, so for example, if you were dreaming of seeing a car and suddenly, a fire engine went by your house and your ears heard that and you woke up, or you half woke up, they would say that's not the dreaming consciousness. Your dreaming consciousness was dreaming of something else, and then a loud enough sound impeded on your sense consciousness, which then engaged in that sound, but that's not the dream consciousness. That's now a sense consciousness that's pulled you away from the dream.
Okay, what if you hear a sound in a dream, but it's really not out there, because we do talk to people in our dreams, or we, see things.
Oh, they say that's a mental, but that they're saying that's mental consciousness because it's not engaging. Because if you think of what's the definition of a sense consciousness is like, so for example, if sound, right? A sense consciousness is a consciousness that arises through its own, how do we say it? There's that phrase, arises through its independence upon its own uncommon empowering condition, the ear sense power, right? And so what they're saying, which I think is quite reasonable in this case, is that if you dream about a conversation, it's not through the power of, it's not arising through the power of the uncommon empowering condition of your ear sense power, right? Or your sense, and it's not arising through the power of your sense organ, like your ear. It's a mental consciousness that's taking on the aspect of sound. So that's why they would say it's a mental. So they say it's a mental consciousness because it's arising in dependence upon its empowering condition. In this case, it's not uncommon, but it's a common empowering condition, you could say, which is the previous moment of a mental consciousness. So in other words, so it arises in dependence upon just the mental consciousness, not the ear organ or the eye organ or the, same thing, right? If you imagine, if you were, it could be tactile, right? If you were petting a cat in a dream and you were feeling its soft fur, it's not arising in dependence upon the tactile sense power of your fingers. It's arising in dependence upon its empowering condition is your mental consciousness. So that's all they're saying, is that it takes on the aspect of those different sensory experiences, but it's mental, but it's arising through it's a mental consciousness because it's arising through a mental sense power as its empowering condition, not one of the sense organs or sense powers of the other. It's not arising through your ear sense power or nose sense power or tactile sense power and so on.
Okay, this might be going off the ranch, so you can please feel free to tell me to be quiet. But is this how eventually one perceives, things in terms of clairvoyance with your, like the Buddhas, are they using their mental consciousness? Because in point of fact, aren't we saying that mental consciousness has the power to hear, has the power to see? Because that's the empowering condition, let's say in a dream. So is that part of what gets, this may be making no sense, but is that part of what's happening when Buddhas are actually showing us clairvoyance because they're using their mental consciousness?
I think actually that both are possible. So yes, on the one hand, there are examples they're taught, right, of the Buddha, of Buddhas, or even of Arya Bodhisattvas, for example, like who use their mental, many examples of that, of in texts, and in the sutras, that's actually in Sutrayana, that's the way it's taught, is that it's I believe that it's the mental sense power, usually at least, that does that kind of thing. But then then there are some Highest Yoga Tantra teachings that say that also it's possible at a certain, for Buddhas and even for people on the completion stage of Highest Yoga Tantra, possibly to also use their sense consciousnesses in a way that's clairvoyant. And there are teachings on how that happens. So both are possible. I believe that it's possible to have for clairvoyance. I think most examples in the scriptures that I've seen are of what you said, mental consciousnesses that are perceiving something, and it's through the mental consciousness, right? Yeah. And therefore also the mental sense power. But there are some examples, just to say, and I think if I remember right, Yume Kensei Risi said that's once was saying that at least some of those teachings about the sense consciousnesses doing certain kinds of clairvoyant things are unique to tantric explanation. So that is possible, as well noted. Yeah. And then somebody else had a hand up too. Was it Lynn? Oh yeah, I thought it was them. Oh, and then John after that. Yeah.
This goes to Sujatha's question, and if you think, and I guess maybe you don't. I've always sort of wondered, you go from a dream state in which you have a sense of these things, okay? And then if you write down the dream, you have to go to a conceptual view of the dream. So what you're saying is when you're in this dream state, you do not characterize or sense the truck as a truck or blue is blue. You sense it in a different way. It's a what do they call it? Mental impression, but you couldn't describe it unless you started applying concepts, because words are concepts basically.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. Yeah, so I guess one small point is like they would say, it's an interesting point. Like they would say that non-conceptual knowers through habituation can note. Well, we do that even when we're right. Even when we're awake, our eye consciousness, they say, can see blue in the sense of it does see blue, but we don't label it blue until we're conceptual. As they would say, a dream is similar, that we're not, that it's kind of like that. So in other words, it's a mental consciousness, but it's non-conceptual in the sense that, yeah, you're not, that it's not conceptual, as you're saying. And that, yeah, we can later, we do that, don't we? Write it down. We impose conceptuality on the dream. But according to, at least according to this tradition, they would say it's a non-conceptual, that the dream conscious itself that's perceiving is non-conceptual. Actually, I'll just share one more reflection that I thought was interesting. Was somebody asked this one geshe as he was talking about it, they said, well, they gave an example. They said, if you have a scary dream and then you feel afraid, what is that? And he said, he differentiated something, which I guess was quite subtle, I thought, but he was saying the appearance in the dream of, let's say, some object that scared the person is non-conceptual and is a dream consciousness. He said the fear is not the dream consciousness. The fear is fear, a mental factor, and he was just differentiating that. He said, like, so the way they view it anyway, the dream is how do you call it? The dream consciousness is the consciousness to which dreams are appearing. But he was giving an example. He said the fear you feel even while you're asleep still, like you wake up and you're feeling afraid, and you can then know, oh, I've been afraid for a while. I was afraid of this, whatever. I saw this thing in the dream. He's saying he was just differentiating something, which was the dream consciousness is a non-conceptual consciousness to which an object is a dream object is appearing. But then he was saying that the fear, he wouldn't call that a dream consciousness, because he said it's a consciousness that arose during sleep, but it's not one to which a dream object was appearing. So therefore, he was saying that's not the dreaming consciousness, although it is a consciousness obviously affected by a dream that occurred during sleep. So they have a kind of way of talking about what is the dream itself, or what is a dreaming consciousness that's specific, which I hadn't heard before, to be honest, until I was reading that commentary.
Well,
yeah,
that makes a lot of sense, because sometimes people say, well, how did you feel during your dream? And you didn't feel anything, even though it was maybe scary or happy or whatever. You just didn't feel anything. It was, if you can capture that moment, it was neutral. In terms of feeling.
That's interesting.
So I can experientially, that makes, if that's the right word, makes sense, that there's sort of a sense neutral mental consciousness, but then we impose all kinds of things once we get further away.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? If you think, for me personally, if I start thinking about this and then start to think, well, what does that imply about, if I think back to one's own experience of dream, and it's like, what was the actual dream and what do I associate with the dream? As I'm waking up and starting to remember the dream, it's a subtle question, isn't it? Like, in other words, how am I, because it's a different consciousness. Like the consciousness that remembers a dream is a different kind of, according to this, would be a different kind of quality and kind of consciousness that's grosser, that's conceptual. According to them, they're saying the dream consciousness is non-conceptual facsimile of a direct perceiver, whereas let's say as I'm waking up, right, and I start to remember the dream, that's a conceptual consciousness that's memory, actually, isn't it? Like at that point, so it's subtle distinctions they're drawing, which are interesting to notice. That, we don't. I don't, at least, don't often notice the difference. I just think, oh, I remember the dream, but they're getting at these subtle distinctions.
Right.
And then what was the emotion, was the emotion in the dream, and what does that mean, that I had an emotion, and was that the dream consciousness, or was that a reaction to the dream consciousness? And was it, those are questions they raise in their debates.
But it always struck me that when I wrote down my dreams, it was sort of a struggle, because I couldn't capture the substance. I couldn't capture the feeling in the dream, or the consciousness, I guess it was, the mental consciousness. I could put it into words, but it wasn't the dream.
Yeah.
It was different. It was conceptual, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? So that's part we're getting at, is that the words won't exactly capture the dream, because by nature, a dream is non-conceptual, and by nature,
Right.
as we're writing it down, it's conceptual.
Right.
Yeah, this is that whole one of the dream. I find that, I don't know, the sense conscious are easy in this facsimiles. The dream one was a kind of harder thing to think about, and more complicated. All right. Well, now we're going to get to Oh, sorry,
John.
John. Sorry, I almost forgot. John, yes.
I guess I have two very different questions. One's kind of starting back a little bit, going back to what Phyllis was just talking about. I mean, what Lynn was just talking about in regards to the conceptual and non-conceptual. I looked back at the definition on page 5 several times, and it says that a direct perceiver is already free of the conceptual. What I'm assuming the conceptual misunderstandings, if I'm reading that correct. A direct perceiver.
Direct perceiver is free of conceptuality and non-mistaken. So that's the definition of a direct perceiver.
Right. So if something became a conceptual thing, in theory, a direct perceiver is already free of that.
Yep. Yeah, it's free of conceptuality. Right. So yeah, and that's right. So yeah, in the sense, so like, yeah, so a direct perceiver doesn't know by way of what do you say? A sound generality and a meaning generality. So it's not knowing by way of terms, and it's not knowing by way of mental images. It's knowing directly in that sense.
Right.
And once we start to conceptualize about it, we're knowing by way of mental images. And terms. So we're adding those. Yeah, we're adding terms and mental images as ways of thinking about what we directly perceive. For example. Right.
Which I assume is one of the steps that we should all be trying to move towards if we're trying to become more enlightened.
Is what? Is to move towards which?
To move towards not being tied down by achieving what a direct perceiver has.
I see. Well, on the one, I guess I'll say it's complicated in one way, because in one way you're right. Like, in other words, Buddhas always only know by way of direct perception. They don't know conceptual. In other words, Buddhas are free from conceptuality completely. So you're right in that sense. And on the other hand, I'll just mention though, on the path, one thing we're trying to do as we sort of are going. So in one sense, if we're trying to achieve Buddhahood, we're trying to, as you said, reach a level where there is only direct perception. There is no more conceptuality at a Buddha level. But on the level of the path, we're also at times, for sure, we're trying to also develop correct conceptual knowers and eliminate incorrect conceptual knowers, because that's part of the path of getting to that. And the example is emptiness. That they often say you have to first to gain a correct conceptual understanding of emptiness in order to eventually get beyond the conceptual to a direct. So there are points on the path where we have to also develop correct conceptual knowers in order. But you're right in the sense that in the end, a Buddha is free from conceptuality. Buddhas don't know by way of conceptuality yet.
So given that, is the next step for a direct perceiver to be able to convert non-conceptual to conceptual, so that then it becomes all a direct perception? I guess I'm trying to understand. There's 4 points here about the causative error of existing. If I was a direct perceiver already, my goal here would be to convert these to conceptual, not non-conceptual.
Oh, I see. Yeah, no, here, like, so let's say in these examples where you have a cause of error existing in the basis, a cause of error existing in the abode, and so on with those. So you're referring to those now, right?
Right.
Yeah. No, so there the idea would be that, let's say the person has an eye disease, right? And so the example they gave, so they're seeing things in they're seeing floaters, let's say, or they're seeing double vision or something. What they would say is we're an ordinary person. We have an eye disease, so we're seeing things in some kind of mistaken way. Therefore, and there, what you would have to do actually is engage a conceptual knower, right? So a concept that would correctly realize, oh wow, I'm seeing 2 moons, but there's not really 2 moons. I must have a eye disease. Let me get to the doctor. That's conceptual, right? So what they're saying there is you would have to recognize through your concepts that there's a problem with, because our direct perception. Or not a direct perception, because it's not a direct perception, but our sensory experience is a wrong. Let's put it that way. Our sensory experience is a wrong consciousness, but we can't know that by way of our sensory consciousness, because the sensory consciousness is impaired for one of these 4 reasons. So there, you'd have to engage your correct conceptual understanding to go, oh wow, I have this disease. Let me get to a doctor and get treatment so that I can again perceive things accurately. and have direct perceptions that are actual direct perceptions because they're accurate. Yeah, so you need to use a conceptual knower to realize this.
So is that what we should be aspiring to then? To be able to truly, staying with that one, if I had the eye disease, because I do see floaters, and I just always accepted it. But I understand it's a function of what my eye doctor has told me is a issue with my eyes. So I've made it into a conceptual thing. So I guess since I think the reason why all of us are involved in Buddhism is to better understand and hopefully lead better lives and eventually move towards enlightenment. Is that the kind of step that they're talking about one should be trying to achieve here?
Yeah, so
You
with
following
these,
the school on this path?
yeah, and on this topic, it would be, so you'd just be using your conceptual understanding to recognize when you're having a facsimile of a direct perception that's not an accurate, correct, direct perception. You know, and like, to give an extreme example, right? Like floaters are easy in a way, right? But, you know, I mean, as a psychologist, right, I work with people that were like, you know, so like I can think of somebody who has a certain, say, well, you know, this would be, actually, that's interesting. Oh, that's funny. You know, they were giving the example here of mental consciousness as a dream. It just occurred to me as another one I can easily give, which is if somebody is having, actually, an example would be if somebody's having auditory hallucinations, right? In other words, that's not their ear consciousness, right? Because there's no actual external sound, right? So they're having that would be a facsimile of a direct perceiver. That's the mental consciousness, right? Because they believe, in other words, they're hearing something, but it's not their ear sense power. That's the uncommon empowering condition. And in that case, yes, going back to your point, I'm just using that as an example to make your point, to illustrate your point, John. So in other words, what would be helpful to that person is to recognize, oh, wow, like, in other words, I'm having this experience of hearing a voice telling me something, but it's not real. In other words, to use the term they use, it's a wrong consciousness. It's not, you know, and it's perceiving, as it says here, it's perceiving a non-existent. So I need to either change my medication or ignore it or whatever the thing may be in that person's case, right? But they can only do that conceptually because they can't, you know, there's something biological going on that's causing the experience they're having. So they can't wish that away, but they can use their conceptual knower to relate to it in a better way than if they don't have a conceptual knower that recognizes it's not, that what's appearing to it is the non-existent. So that's the key there, I think, is that you would want to use a conceptual knower to recognize that what's clearly appearing to it, using the term he uses here, is a non-existent. That's the goal. Like the floaters, right? To recognize the floaters aren't really there. Now in that case, it's not so, it's less extreme. So I want to go to a more extreme example of the, but yeah, so you have to use a conceptual knower though.
Thank you.
Lynn, you have some. Yeah.
Lynn, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks. I have the perfect example for John. When my daughter was young, we were driving to the beach. She must have been 2 or 3 in the back seat in her child's seat. So we're going through this wooded area. So the moon comes in and out as we're driving through the wooded area. And she says to me, look at all the moons. I keep seeing different moons. And I'm telling her, no, there's only one moon. But her sense of that, because she doesn't understand the planetary system, is that there's many moons.
Wow.
And it didn't matter what I said to her, there's one moon and you're just seeing it from different angles. She didn't understand that because she kept seeing different moons. We'd go in the woods and out of the woods, in the woods. So it's exactly what John was mentioning. You need a concept of the planetary system to understand why you're seeing things in a certain way.
Yeah, and really you guys are getting at the subtle interaction between conceptual and non-conceptual knowers, right? Which is very, you know, I think it's amazing what the examples because like we ordinarily just don't notice that we're going back and forth, right? Between a non-conceptual sense perception and then a conceptual knower. We just sort of believe it's all one thing. But as you just described, Lynn, it's like your daughter's statement helped you see, or helped right now is helping me see, right, how we go back and forth between those. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, other comments on all that? It's interesting to think about. Sorry. Go on to the next section. Right. So next comes, inferential valid cognizers, right? So these are prominent, right? Valid cognizer is prominent, right? So these are valid cognizers. So first it starts with the definite, and he gives, it's funny, Perpachoke is this great scholar, right? The tutor of the great 13th Dalai Lama. I'm sort of critiquing him a little today, but he gives a definition which the Geshe-s actually critiqued, so I'll critique it. He says, a new incontrovertible, the definition of a valid cognizer, a new incontrovertible determinative knower that is directly produced in dependence upon a correct sign that is its basis. So one point I'll make here just about this definition is that the two different Geshe-s took issue with is using the term directly. They say they think it's better that most texts give a definition, and they seem to prefer the definition that leaves out the words directly. So it would just say that is produced in dependence upon a correct sign. I'll just mention that the issue with directly is that directly imply, I'll just mention this because it was what I think it's a good point, is that the problem with directly is that it implies that immediately upon exposure to the sign means a reason, right? So that immediately upon exposure to the sign or reason, one immediately develops this inferential valid cognizer. And what the Geshe-s were pointing out, which I think is quite true, isn't it, is that oftentimes one is presented with the sign or reason, and then it takes quite a bit of time, actually. It's not direct. It can take, oh, sure, thanks, Sujata. It takes quite a bit of time, oftentimes, between hearing or reading or being exposed to the reason or the sign and generating the valid inferential cognition. So, so the point here, I guess that they're getting at, I guess it does sometimes happen directly, right? Somebody hears a reason and immediately gains the realization of something, or cognizes something. But for sure, you can think of from oneself, if you think about it, there are many examples, right, where somebody gives you a reason, you're thinking about it, and suddenly you get it, right? And sometimes also there's a reason, but then you have to think of an example, or you have to think of something about that reason in order to gain the inferential cognition. So I think that what they're saying, and they said most of the texts say, is you can think of it as a new, incontrovertible, determinative knower that is produced in dependence upon a correct sign that is its basis or its cause. And determinative knower, as I said, right, means it's inferential. So that means inferential means that it's conceptual, right? So that's why it's a determinative knower, right? It's knowing by way of a mental image, by way of elimination. What makes it a valid cognizer, right, are these things. It's new, right? So because in this school, right, in the Sautantrika school, a valid cognizer has to be a new cognizer. And incontrovertible means it's correct and cannot be refuted, right? That it's definitive, that it's incontrovertible in that sense. So it's also correct, right? And it's produced in dependence upon a correct reason or correct sign. And then I'm gonna just point out here next, actually, it's interesting. What happens now is that we're going to get into, remember I said this before, like, this whole idea of developing correct inferential cognition, as the Dalai Lama often points out, this is a humongous amount of our practice, not all by any means, but a lot of one's practice is trying to develop correct inferential cognition. And as the Dalai Lama points out, that it's direct. I mean, I'm sorry, not directing. Valid. I said direct inferential cognition. Valid inferential cognizers. That's what I should have said. So one is trying to develop valid inferential cognition at certain points, And because in the Sautantrika system and also in the Majjhimaka system, they're the same on this point. For example, to understand selflessness and to understand emptiness, the process is one develops an inferential cognition of that, and then meditates on that inferential cognition in order to eventually get a direct realization. So this is very important, right? The ability to know how do we develop inferential cognition is a spiritually important topic if you want to achieve liberation or enlightenment. So this is an extremely important subject in that sense, inferential valid cognizers. They're also part of our ordinary everyday lives. Anyway, okay, so now he presents three types. When they're divided, there are three types that he presents. Inferential cognizers by the power of fact, inferential cognizers through renown, and inferential cognizers through belief. Most of what we're going to cover later in this text is going to come under the first of those three headings. So that's the most important one. And so we're going to do a lot more on this. I won't go into too much detail here, but he says an illustration of the first, an inferential cognizer by the power of fact, is an inferential cognizer that realizes that sound is impermanent to the sign of being a product. And so that's so the fact that it's a product, and we're going to get, I shouldn't go into too much detail here because we're going to cover this in a lot of detail in the next section, but another example, I just want to say this, another example of an inferential cognizer to the power of fact, which if you've studied Buddhism a lot, you've heard, is phenomena are empty of inherent existence because they're dependent arisings. Right? That'd be an example of an inferential cognizer to the power of fact. But then another much more mundane one would be, if there's billowing smoke coming from the kitchen, there's fire in the kitchen. That would be an example of a valid cognizer to the power of fact. And so there are from a Buddhist perspective, phenomena are impermanent. Sound is impermanent because it's a product, or phenomena are empty of intrinsic existence because they're dependent arisings, are of great spiritual importance, right? But there are many mundane examples of inferential cognizers that are realized through the power of the fact, right? I give an example, like billowing smoke, there's fire, or anyway, you can go through countless ones, right? Like, if you say like, anyway, I won't go into detail. You get the idea there. We're going to cover more on it later, so I'll keep going. An illustration of the second, an inferential cognizer through renown, is an inferential cognizer that realizes that it is suitable to express that rabbit possessor the rabbit possessor by the term moon from the sign of its existing among objects of thought. What does that mean? What that means is this: is one kind of inferential valid cognizer. Actually, I'll give an example. Like if I say Frank's name is Frank, right? That is what they're pointing out here is that's a valid inferential cognizer. What's the proof? It's that from the sign that it exists among objects of thought. In other words, well, I'm calling him Frank, other people are calling him Frank, therefore he's suitable to be called Frank. And that's enough to prove that, right? And actually, it's an important point here. Like, I don't know, if Frank's birth certificate said something else, does that disprove that? Then we say no, because that's why they're giving an example. You can call the moon moon, or you can call the moon. In India, they have this phrase, we say man in the moon, they see a rabbit. So in India, there's like a tradition of saying, oh, the rabbit bearer, or the rabbit possessor, or the rabbit bearer, meaning moon, right? And what they're saying is, you can call it whatever you want. In Tibetan, they call it dawa, and then whatever, So in other words, what they're saying is, if people call it that, then then people call it that in a particular context. And it's just contextual, right? It's not some ultimate truth about the thing. It's that if enough people start to call something, so if you made up, and if your house, if you, oh my goodness, like, I remember when I was a little kid, my grandfather I forget it was me or my sister. One of us said, instead of spaghetti, we said Pischetti when we were like, 1 or something. And, and so he would have a joke. Oh, we're going to have Pischetti tonight, and is that the correct term? No. But in that context of that time and that place, everybody knew what he meant, and we would all laugh. And so you would say it was an object, it was a sign, the sign that exists among objects of thought. In other words, that in a given context, something is called something. So that's good enough. And they would say that's a valid cognizer in the sense that, yes, it's called that. And you know what you're referring to, it doesn't mean anything beyond that. So it's just, so this is like a valid cognizer of names, really, and of terms. And part of what they're getting at, I'll just point out, it seems very simple, and it is. And yet what they're getting at is quite, it has deep implications, right? Which is that we often think that, let's say it the right way. It's actually funny, right? Like, let's say it the right way. We get attached, I guess all I'll say is this, is we get attached to our names, don't we, about things. And what they're saying is names are actually arbitrary, right? In other words, that they're made up. And as long as it's accepted by a group of people, that's all a name is, right? And it can change. Language changes over time. And I remember that when I realized Gyume Khenpo Rinpoche was known for most of his life by a different name, actually. And then I guess, that was his name given. Monks take ordination at different points. So they're given like childhood ordination and then full ordination when they're in their 20s. And I realized, he was known as Geshe Tinley Topgyal for many years. But the Dalai Lama said, you should use this name, your full ordination name. So he started, I was like, oh, wow, that's not really, is that really his name? It's like silly, right? What does it mean really? Right? It's whatever name is being used. So that's that. And then the last, which people may have questions about, but I will just say it. The last, inferential cognizer through the power of belief. An illustration of the third, an inferential cognizer through the power of belief, is an inferential cognizer that realizes that the scripture, from giving resources, from ethics, a happy migration, is incontrovertible with respect to the meaning indicated by it, the sign of its being a scripture free from the 3 contradictions. Okay, so what are the 3 contradictions? I was going to give a detailed. What they say, I'll just point a few points about this last one, which are, one is inferential cognizers through belief are specifically related to very hidden phenomena. And I think it's always funny. A very hidden, one point is that I often think about this. What does it mean to be, because there are 3 types of phenomena according to Buddhism in these teachings. There are manifest phenomena, which can be known by way of direct perception. There are slightly hidden phenomena, which require inferential cognition to understand. Right. So a manifest phenomena would be, for example, it's something that if you ask a 5-year-old, is the truck blue? They can look and go, oh, it's blue, or they'll go, no, it's red, right? That's a manifest phenomena that can be known by what, meaning they can see it, or they can hear it, or they can taste, is sugar sweet? Is this, you put it on your tongue and there's no need for inferential cognition. A 5-year-old could go, oh, it's sweet, so that's direct, so that's something that can be known by way of direct perception. Then slightly hidden phenomena can be known by way of inferential cognition. An example of that is, impermanence, right? Is sound impermanent, right? Or are things empty of intrinsic existence? But a more mundane one, right? Like, is there a fire on the other side of that hill? Well, if you see humongous amounts of billowing smoke, and you smell the smoke coming over the hill, you can say, well, even though I haven't been there, yes, there's a fire there, right? So that would have to be known by way of inferential cognition because it's slightly hidden. And then there are very hidden phenomena, which cannot be known, which can only be known by way of somebody else, like by way of, you could say, reliance upon an authority. Now, one point I want to make, though, that I just think is interesting to think about is there is no such thing as something that's manifest, hidden, or very hidden out of context. Does that make sense? Like, in other words, so what's manifest for one person may be hidden for another, and what's extremely hidden for one person may be manifest to another. An example I'll give is a Buddha, right? In other words, what's very hidden to me is a manifest phenomenon to a Buddha because a Buddha knows it by way of direct perception. So it's not intrinsically, it's not from its own side very hidden. It's just very hidden for me, right? And even if I say like a manifest phenomenon, like I gave the example of a blue car, let's say, right? And I said like but a young child could look. But actually, if a person is blind, right, then for that person, the color of the car would be, a very hidden phenomenon. In other words, they would have to rely upon the testimony of somebody else who was an authority to them, right, about color, specifically because if they can't see color, right? So one point I just want to make is that whether something's manifest or slightly hidden or extremely hidden depends upon the context and who the person is who's trying to know it. So it's not extremely hidden or whatever by its own nature. But then anyway, so here, inferential cognition through the power of belief is where we, what did I say, right? Where for oneself, it's an extremely hidden phenomena. So for my, so if something's a very extremely hidden phenomena for me, then I can only know it by way of belief. And I just gave an example, right? I'm going to get back to this point here, but I gave the example. I said, so for a person who's visually impaired and fully blind, right, the color of a car would be an extremely hidden phenomenon since they have to rely on somebody else to determine that. So how can you know, right? In other words, they can't know that through direct perception. So how do they know whether to try, how do you develop belief? Does that make sense? And so that's a question to think about. But one point I'm making here is that one point I'm implying is that there are humongous numbers of things that we know through the power of belief, if that makes sense, right? There are many, many things that we know that we know by way of, and a typical example that's given is the date of my own birth. That's a simplistic one, right? Like, in other words, I can't remember the date of my birth. I can't logically determine the date of my birth. I can only know that through the power of reliance upon an authority, my mom, my dad, my birth certificate, right, which is a government document. Right? I can only know that through reliance upon others. I can't know that directly because I don't remember. I didn't check the calendar on that day, and so on. Right? I wasn't capable of that. So there are many things we know through the power of belief, which means we believe it based on the testimony of somebody who's authoritative on that subject. Okay, now it says here a scripture that is free of the three contradictions. And so what that's getting, what are the three, I just want to say, what are the three, I should explain, what is the three contradictions? So what that means is that here you're relying upon, it's saying a scripture, because it's giving an example of relying upon a Buddhist scripture. So it's saying you shouldn't rely on it unless it's free of these three. One is, it should be free, if it has to be free of contradicting your own direct perceptions. So there, so if, in other words, if a Buddhist scripture says something that contradicts your own direct perception, don't believe. Buddhism is saying, don't believe your own direct perceptions, right? So, and if you can directly perceive that something is true, that has more authority than somebody else's testimony. Right? Second one is, and that's for manifest phenomena, right? Then for slightly hidden phenomena, it should be, it has to be free of contradicting something that you can realize by way of inferential cognition. So in other words, if you're looking at, in the example here, if you're looking at Buddhist scriptures, you would compare them to your own direct perceptions to see if they're correct. So when you study the Four Noble Truths, you're supposed to do this, right? Does my own direct perception support or contradict the Four Noble Truths? Is there suffering, for example, is one that you can directly perceive, right? That would be an example of something that you can, actually, if you think about it, right? Like, think about that, right? The direct, certain kinds of suffering are manifest phenomena that you can see through your own direct perception. Other points in the Four Noble Truths are slightly hidden phenomena, right? What's the cause of suffering? You have to contemplate that. But it's possible to realize that through inferential cognition. That's something you can actually inferentially cognize. So a slightly hidden phenomenon would be something that so my point here, so the scripture has to not contradict your direct perception, not contradict your own inferential valid cognitions. And the third point is, the speaker shouldn't contradict themselves. So the scripture shouldn't contradict, in order to have faith in a certain teaching, it shouldn't contradict other teachings by that person, in this case, the Buddha. And if it does, then you can't rely on it just upon the words, right? You have to then step back and say, well, wait a second, I'm not going to have faith in this just on the words. I need to figure out, what does it mean? And don't have faith in it until you've determined that in some definitive way. And say about this is, I just want to, okay, this is the broader point I want to make about this, which is, I think if you, in this teaching, is that inferential cognition through the power of belief is relational, is about, actually, is about trust. I sometimes think trust is a better word than belief, maybe. In other words, like, why do I believe that I was born on my birthday? You know, and part of that is like, well, in my case, there are many people, you know, there's my not only my mother, but my father and my grandparents and some aunts and uncles all told me the same date, and it's consistent with what it says on a number of documents. And, you know, those, and I trust those people very deeply, you know, based on many, many years of experience of them. And so the point here is that inferential cognizers through the power of belief are relational and are developed in a context of trust for the speaker, if that makes sense. And what I would suggest, if you want to think about this one, I don't want to go too into detail, it's not the main topic of the whole text here, but is to think about, how do I do that with any topic, right? I gave the example of birthday, but actually there are, every day there are examples of that, right? You know, like, in other words, if your coworker says, oh, so-and-so handed in their report, right? And you didn't see the person hand in the report, and you can't inferentially cognize whether the person handed in the report at that moment, you know, do you believe that coworker or not? Right? I'm just giving you that this is something that's part of our everyday life all the time. You know, there are many, I mean, every day there are hundreds of examples of things that you may know by the power of belief, you know. I mean, if, yeah, just the other day, like, yeah, like Shayla said to me that her brother's friend had died. You know, now, like, I didn't know that person. I didn't look for their obituary, but I believed her immediately. You know, like, she was, and then later I saw the fundraiser for the person about something, you know, fundraiser about it. But my point is like, I'm just giving an example, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of examples every day of things we, what's the word? Know through the power of trust. I want to call it trusting somebody else's testimony. And so what they're saying here is, how do you develop that kind of relationship to the Buddha, or to other Buddhist teachers, to Tsongkhapa or to Nagarjuna or whoever? And they're saying that you have to develop a relationship, right? Of seeing, does what they say contradict my direct perceptions? Does what they say contradict my inferential cognitions? Does what they say, is it consistent with their other teachings? And eventually, like happens in daily life, you develop a relationship, and therefore you can trust certain points that they say, you know, that as you do in real life, in other parts of your life. This is also real life. So that's that. So that's the third kind of inferential cognizer. And then it says, an inferential cognizer through renown is necessarily an inferential cognizer by the power of the fact. So that's just saying, you know, in other words, that's just saying that the example I gave, right, of whatever, a name, right, or is that it's an inferential cognizer through the power of the fact, in the sense that, you know, I heard people, you know, an example, like I've called Frank, his name on the, you know, his email says Frank, his Zoom says Frank. I've heard other people call him Frank. He's Frank, you know, and it's a fact. In other words, the fact is the evidence, right? So in other words, there's evidence to that, as in the other cases. Also, whatever is a direct perceiver is not necessarily a direct valid cognizer, because the second moment of a sense direct perceiver apprehending a form is not a valid cognizer. That's just making the point about new, right? That valid cognizers are new. And so if it's a second moment, it's still correct consciousness, but it's not pramana because it's not a new consciousness. And that's what he explained next. And then it says, oh, it's the same point with inferential cognizers, right? In other words, the first moment of real, if you have an inferential cognition realizing that sound is impermanent, that first moment of that would be pramana, or a valid cognizer, and after that it will be subsequent cognizers, right? So it would be still correct, but it will be a subsequent cognizer because it's not new. That's straightforward. And then he quotes Dharmottara. The first moment of direct perceiver and the first moment of an inferential cognizer are valid cognizers, but subsequent moments and the continuums of those, because of being non-different and establishment abiding, have forsaken being valid cognizers. He's just saying they're subsequent cognizers. That's all. Any questions about that section before I go on to the next section? He's kind of just introducing valid cognizers here by giving us the categories of them. All right, I'll keep going. Yeah, this time. So then he says, this is kind of funny. He says terminological division, and it's terminological because it's not actual divisions. This is just terms. In other words, so he says here, inference for oneself and inference for another. Furthermore, when inferential cognizers are terminologically divided, there are two: inference for oneself and inference for another. The first, inference for oneself and inferential cognizer, are synonyms. So what he's saying is, inference for oneself is where one thinks through something and gains an inferential valid cognizer. And so so that's an actual inferential cognizer. And then the second one, he says, inference for another and correct proof statement are synonyms. And actually, what's being gotten at here is it's a terminological division, because an inference for another is not an actual inference, right? In other words, inference has to happen in the person's own mind. So in other words, so sometimes they'll say, sometimes they'll use the term inferential cognizer when you're helping somebody else to gain an understanding of something. But when you're helping somebody else and you're giving the reason verbally, that's not an actual inferential cognizer, because it's, one point they made is an inferential cognizer is a consciousness. So a book that helps somebody have inferential cognition or speech are matter, right? Speech is sound, a book is form. So those are not actual inferential cognizers because they're not consciousnesses, but they help. They're sometimes called that because they help induce inferential cognizers. That's all that's being said. This is inferential, ancillary minds apprehending a sign. Ancillary, with respect to explaining minds apprehending a sign, there are two parts: definition and divisions. The definition. So the definition of something's being a mind apprehending a sign and the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product is, I'll keep going, then I'll explain it. It is a knower in the continuum of a full-fledged other party for whom sound is being proved to be impermanent by the sign product. That is a common locus of being incontrovertible with respect to either that sound is a product or that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent, and also being the cause of an inferential cognizer realizing that sound is impermanent by the sign product that arises in dependence upon its acting as a causal condition. Is that clear? That's funny. It's kind of, yeah, when you first read these things, you go, wow, what is he saying? But I think where to start here. So what we're getting into, maybe I'll say it this way first. What we're getting into now, actually, which may seem a little at first unfamiliar, I'd say, but it's actually helpful if we're going to go further in this text, is the nature of inferential cognition. Right? What is an inferential cognition? And I want to, this time, so this is an important topic, actually, because as I said, inferential cognitions are really important in our spiritual life, right? If you want to realize emptiness, you can first do it through inferential cognition. If you want to realize selflessness, you're going to do it through inferential cognition. If you're going to first realize impermanence, you're going to realize it through inferential cognition, and so on. So inferential cognitions are important. And the next point I want to make is, I was thinking about this yesterday as I was thinking about this topic, is that so what does it mean for something to be an inferential cognition, and how do we develop them? And also, how do you know the difference? This is an important one, because as I said earlier, this is what I was contemplating. It's like, and it's kind of funny. I mean, this is always true, but it's almost, seems almost bizarre to be saying it in this time to be saying it in this country in this moment is almost bizarre, because like, we're in a time where everybody thinks they're having inferential cognitions, about all kinds of topics, and they're all disagreeing with each other, right? And want to punch each other or something. Like, it's like, it's a time where, and my point is that we always think we're right, right? And we're all to some extent guilty of that. And we're not always good at knowing, when do I have an actual valid inferential cognition, and when do I just think something's true without having had any valid cognition of it? And it's hard for all of us to differentiate that, is one point. And so what Buddhist teachers, and this is the tradition of Pramana, right? The Pramana texts, which we're studying here a little bit. This comes from like Dignaga and Dharmakirti, great logicians of great thinkers from Nalanda Monastic University. And so there are certain terms here, I think, that you have to know, right? So one is, it says here, a sign, right? So the sign is a reason, right? The reason for something, to prove something. And say this next, because I think it's useful here. For something to be a valid, according to Buddhism, Buddhist logic teachings, and remember, also make one other point. I've said this once before, but I'll just say it again very quickly. The Dalai Lama often makes the same joke, actually, right, where he says, but he's serious, is he says, the Nalanda tradition relies upon pramana, relies upon reasoning. And then he makes the point, he says, other Buddhist traditions actually don't have this very much, these teachings. And then he said, I mean, actually, I think it's quite sweet in one way. The Dalai Lama often kind of presents a kind of almost a positive sense of pride in the Tibetan tradition having upheld the Nalanda tradition, right? Which relies upon reasoning. And then he says, right, he makes this point, he says, otherwise, he says when he goes and studies and other, meets other Buddhist traditions and sort of thinks about them, that, if you don't have the teachings on logic, then then you're stuck with just relying upon scriptures, right? And not being able to assert what can withstand reasoning and what can't. Therefore, coming to your own definitive conclusion, and being able to, yeah. Anyway, you get the point. So like but the joke he makes is he says he said he teases sometimes other Buddhist teachers he knows from other traditions, where he says it's like you can only eat the soft food, because it's like that if you want to digest the hard stuff, you have to have strong teeth. And he says this is the strong teeth, these teachings, where you can digest the difficult points on the spiritual path, is the teachings on logic. And so the Dalai Lama puts great emphasis on them. But anyway, so I'm no great expert on them, but here we're going to present an introduction. So in order to understand what's being gotten at in this section, get through, yeah. So for something to be, I'm going to use this. It says here, there's this term in this paragraph I just read, where it says, in the continuum of a full-fledged other party. So what does it mean to be a full-fledged other party? Just that phrase, right? Full-fledged other party. So actually, full-fledged person can be yourself or somebody else, first of all. But what they say is that a full-fledged person is somebody who's ready to develop a valid, inferential valid cognizance. So, and one thing I think is fascinating, I'm just going to say is, there are a lot of interesting points here, so I'm going to go slow. One point that I think is wonderful in Buddhism, that these teachings say, and Chandrakirti says basically the same thing, is if you present, what they're getting at in full-fledged other person is, if you present the correct reasons to the wrong person, you're wasting your time. Because the person has to be ready to hear that reason. So, which means they have to have realized, which, we'll get to what that means, but in other words, and Chandrakirti has a line which I'm not going to quote exactly, but the essence of it is something like, it's like if you're arguing with somebody who's not willing to use reason, then you're a fool, basically, right? Like, is one point that they're making. In other words, the point here is that the person has to be ready to hear that reason, or it's not going to be useful to them. That's really the point, right? And the same applies to oneself, right? In other words, you have to become somebody who's capable of using a reason to understand something. And what does that mean? So we're going to get into that. So a full-fledged other person, or a person who's ready to hear the sign is, and better to make use of it. So that full-fledged other person has realized the three modes. So that's a full-fledged person realizes the three modes. So now I'm going to describe what are the three modes. And that's not in the text, but it's implicit in the text. This text was written, the audience of this text would ordinarily know the three modes. So you have to know it in order to get the meaning of the text. And the three modes are part of any inferential valid cognition. So the three modes are, first you have to understand, and we're going to use the example here that he uses. I'm going to use two examples. Actually, I'm going to use two different examples just to make it really clear. So one example, I'm going to use two examples of proof statements. So one is, which is the one he's using, Pervachok's using, which is sound. He's using this one. Sound is impermanent because it's a product, right? Another proof statement that we could use, that's a standard Buddhist one, is things are empty of intrinsic existence because they're dependently arisen, right? Now, actually, I'll ask a question. You've heard that, right? Things are empty of intrinsic existence because they're dependently arisen. Why have you not realized emptiness? According to in the same way that Tsongkhapa and the Nagarjuna did. The reason is we're not fully fledged, right? According to the way it's being used here. That you see this term fully fledged, that's that. In other words, because in other words, if we were fully fledged, then the first time you heard the Dalai Lama or whoever, or whatever Buddhist teacher you've heard, you'd hear a Buddhist Lama say, all things are empty of intrinsic existence because they're dependently arisen. And you would realize emptiness, right? It has some amazing transformative experience. Why doesn't that happen? Because we're not fully fledged, according to the way this term is using. What does that mean? First is, so the three modes. First mode is you must understand what they call the property of the subject. And that is, so what does that mean? It means that you have to understand that the subject, so the subject of the argument is sound in the first one, right? Sound is what is the subject. And you have to understand that sound, in that case, the subject, has the property of being a product, right? So when it says the property of the subject, means you have to understand that whatever the subject of the argument is, has the property being discussed, right? So if the subject is sound in the first proof statement, you understand that it has the property of being a product. In my second example, you have to understand that I'm going to use the example of person is empty because they're dependently arisen. So there, the subject would be person, right? But you have to understand, you would have to actually have realized that that subject has the property of being independent arising, right? Which means you have to understand, and by the way, to understand that either of those things, you have to understand then what does it mean to be a product, right? And you have to understand what is sound. And then you have to understand that sound has that property of being a product. Does that make sense? So there's a lot to that, actually. It's not just the word. You can't just understand the word. You have to have realized that, right? That sound, what is sound? What does it mean to be a product? And that sound actually, all sounds, not just some, but that all sounds are products. So that's the first, is you have to realize the property of the subject, right? So that whatever, and that means that in these cases, that the sign or the reason exists in the subject, right? So the reason product exists in sound, in all sound. The reason dependent arising exists in all persons. And this might, so that's the first of the three modes. Second of the three modes that you have to have realized is what they call the pervasion. And that means that I'm going to give an example and then I'll explain. The example of product, right? So you'd have to understand the pervasion would mean whatever is a product is pervaded by being impermanent, right? And that there are no exceptions. All product, you have to have realized that all products are pervaded by, or pervaded by impermanence. And pervasion, I need more. Or you'd have to understand that in the example, second example I gave, that whatever is dependently arisen is pervaded by being empty of having its own intrinsic nature, right? So you'd have to understand that there are no exceptions, right? So in other words, if you're not sure, if you haven't realized deeply and clearly that whatever is a product is impermanent in the sense of momentary, then you haven't realized the pervasion. If you're not sure, if you think, well, maybe there's some exception, maybe there's something that's a product that's permanent, I don't know, right? If you're not 100% certain, then you haven't realized the pervasion, right? Or if you say, well, most things that are dependently arisen, I could see they're probably empty of intrinsic nature, but I'm not sure of everything. Maybe there's something that could be dependently arisen, but not empty. You haven't realized the pervasion, right? So the second of the three modes, in order to be a fit vessel, or a, how do we say it, fully fledged person, is you have to have realized, what the first one, remember the first one, the property of the subject, right? So if the example of the subject is sound, you have to have realized that it's a product, all sound, right? Second one, the pervasion, that whatever is a product is pervaded by, or is absolutely must be impermanent, right? And then the third point is the counter pervasion, or sometimes they call it the reverse pervasion. And that is, in this example, it would be, in the first example, it would be whatever, actually, I'm going to say it this way. One way of saying it is whatever is not a product is not impermanent. Or if there were something, another exact example I'll give is, if something were not dependently arising, it would not be empty. The way, I'll read it here, actually, a different text. Okay, so here's the example to give the counter pervasion. It's that another way of saying it is that there was an actual phrase I liked, but okay, here it is. This is the way. This is a better way. I like this phrasing. So this will be the counter pervasion. Whatever is permanent is necessarily not a product. That's another way of saying it, right? Whatever is permanent is necessarily not a product, or whatever has intrinsic existence is necessarily not dependently arisen, right? So you would have to understand that that's true in all cases, right? There could be no counterexample to that. And so now we can go back to the text, right? To be a full-fledged person, you have to have actually realized all three of those. That's what they call the three modes, right? And if you're not completely certain about those three things, then when somebody presents the reason, you're not going to have a valid cognition. Does that make sense? Even if the reason is correct, somebody could give you a perfect reason, it's not going to serve the function of inducing a correct inferential, I don't say correct, a valid inferential cognition, because you're not a full-fledged party, because you haven't realized the three modes. Does that make sense? So now I'm going to go back. So the sign, right? Now we can understand the sign, right? So the sign is the reason, right? So the reason is product in this case, right? So in the example he's giving, he says the proof. So the proof statement is sound as a product because it's impermanent, right? So the reason is product, right? And so I just want to slow down that. Now, I just want to get it. Does it make sense that you like? I guess what I want to say. Actually, I'm trying to think how it's better to go slow here. What I want to ask you to do is just think about this idea of the three modes, right? And ask yourself a question, which is, in things that you know or think you know, have you realized the three modes? Because this is a big topic, isn't it? And you just go through the words here of this text. But, and I guess like if you think about what are the things you strongly believe to be true, right? And then ask yourself, some of them, and I want to be clear, I believe some of them you probably have realized the three modes, others you haven't. Does that make sense? I'm going to suggest that I believe that's true. Some of you may be Buddhas and then I'm wrong. If you're a Buddha, then then I'm wrong because you don't have any mistaken mistakes, but there are a lot of, I guess if you think about this thing of the three modes, is it, you know, because one of it is if there's one counterexample, if a counterexample is possible, you know, in other words, if you're not sure if you can't be certain that there's not a counterexample to your reason, then you don't have an inferential valid cognition of that. You just think it's true, right? Or you have a belief, or you know something by the power, you know something because you believe it, or you know something you have doubt, or whatever. There are many other ways of knowing, which we'll get into. But to have and that's what, remember we said incontrovertible, that a valid cognizer is incontrovertible. A pramana, right? A valid inferential cognizer is incontrovertible. So part of what we're getting at here is it's incontrovertible because of the three modes, right? The three modes are a logical proof statement, actually, right? And so if you've actually realized those, then for you it's incontrovertible because you've realized that. I remember, oh wow, I just remembered an example here. Like I'm being silly, I'm being simplistic for a second. But I remember once, I was a little kid. Like I went for the first time ever, I went to a sleepaway camp for like a few weeks or something. And we were sitting in the dining hall and we saw billowing smoke coming from where the dorms were. And somebody said it was this other group's dorms. And we felt like, I was with whoever I was in my dorm or something. So we were like relieved, right? Oh, phew, it's not our dorm. Now, and then we walked over and found out it was our dorm through direct perception. Or whoever told us that was wrong. It was our dorm, and all our stuff had burned. And my point, I'm just using a silly, simplistic example here for a second, right? Like, so on the one hand, like where there's a traditional Buddhist example where there's billowing smoke, there's fire, right? Okay, well that was correct. The other part was wrong, right? In other words, and part of the point I'm getting at is like, how do you, in other words, and so that was through the power of testimony, right? But I didn't know the person who had said the statement. I just sort of thought, oh, I was a little kid, and I thought, oh, good, okay. What I'm getting at here is there a pervasion? Are you certain, right? Are you certain that all cases, right? So, and I'm going to go back to now Pervachok is using a traditional Buddhist example. Sound is impermanent because it's a product, right? So first of all, do you know, is all sound, the property of the subject, is sound necessarily a product? Is it produced by causes and conditions? Right? And you have to pause and think, is there any counterexample? Could there be a sound that's not produced by causes and conditions? Could there be one example of a sound that's not produced by, so then you have to think, what's sound, right? There's some Indian philosophical schools who believe that there's sound that's not produced by causes and conditions. Buddhists say they're obviously wrong, but they believe that, so one point is that, right? So are all sounds products? Ryan was shaking his head strongly. Yes, so he has an awareness of the property of the subject.
There's no sound in space, and space is a vacuum. You need air to have sound. Therefore, it's product.
Good point. Okay, so one has to realize that, right? Then the second, whatever is a product, I'm going to change impermanent to momentary, right? Changing moment by moment, because that's impermanent, the real meaning of impermanent here, right? So is that true? Whatever, now remember this statement, whatever is a product is momentary, changes instant by instant, right? So, and you have to think like a gigantic iron obelisk is a product. Is it momentary? Does it change instant by instant? A giant sequoia tree is a product. Is it momentary? whatever, like, a giant build, like whatever, buildings are products. Are they momentary? Cups are products. Are they momentary? And look, and actually look at your, and if you look at like an object, the table in front of you, it's a product. And actually, do you recognize it's momentary? Is it really momentary? Do you really accept that all products are momentary? And I'm just going through his example, right? Then the counter pervasion, right? And I'm going to use that phrase that I like better than the one from the Geshe, right? Right, that if something were permanent, it would, by definition, necessarily not be a product. Right? And you can give an example. An example in Buddhism, they would say an example of a permanent phenomena which is not a product is uncompounded space. Right? Uncompounded space is not momentary because it's not a product. Emptiness is not momentary because it's not a product. It's not produced by causes and conditions. And have you realized that? And what they're saying is, if you realize those three modes, then if you were to contemplate, okay, so wait a second, then all sound is momentary because it's a product. You could gain an inferential valid cognition of that, right? Where it will be, and remember, what does that mean? It's new and it's incontrovertible. In other words, so you could have then, if somebody came to you and said, no, wait a second, right? If suddenly there were an article that said, sound, there's an example of sound that's not a product and it's permanent. Would you have doubt? Right? Would you have doubt? Then it's not, if you would have doubt, then you have to go back. That's not incontrovertible then. Right? It's saying, well, I think I believe the three modes, but I'm not certain. Something in those three modes, I'm not certain, right? If an MIT professor said, wait a second, no, you misunderstood it. Sound, not all sound is, if suddenly you said that, right? A professor from MIT showed up and said, no, sound is not always impermanent. Here's an example, and they gave you some formulas in a mathematical, right? And if you say, well, wait a second, I'd have to read that. Maybe I'd be wrong. Then it's not incontrovertible yet, right? You have doubt still. That's my point. It's not yet a inferential valid cognition. It's maybe and we'll get into other ways of knowing. But Lynn, you have a comment, question.
There we go. If you go to live music performances, especially jazz, musicians often say, no one will ever hear this performance again. It's unique. It's only in this moment, in this time. And it's sort of the example you're given, any music performance, but it's obvious with jazz because there's a lot of improvisation. No one will ever experience those sounds in that way ever again. It's just not possible. Whereas if you have a CD of a performance, that's not it, because that's always the same, right? You play it and it's always the same.
So is the CD, so would the CD be a counter example to this? So is not all sound impermanent then? Because if there's a CD, so then is sound permanent?
You don't hear the same thing you hear live. You just don't do it. You can't do it. Technically, you can't do that. It can be a live performance, but even if you were at the live performance, you're going to hear something different when it's recorded.
Yes, but the CD will sound the exact same 100 times in a row.
No. The CD, if you play it over and over, that will sound the same.
That's what I meant.
So that's not a sound, I think, under this reasoning, because it's permanent. Whereas live music is not, it's impermanent.
The CD would be a sound, but you're actually hearing it. The idea would be that are you hearing it differently every time, or is it exactly unchanged? That would kind of introduce kind of doubt into the realization. Like if you're listening to a CD over and over again, are you hearing the same thing every time or not?
It's easier to deal with live music. The CD is different because it's it's physical. It doesn't change. It doesn't change. You may change, but it doesn't change.
Well, and so I guess I would give, so based on what Lynn just said, then I mean according, so actually I mean, this would be actually if you were doing Buddhist debate, right? Then you would say, so Lynn just asserted, since Lynn said the CD doesn't change, Lynn just asserted not all products are impermanent because the CD is a product, but Lynn asserted it's permanent. So Lynn, so now we say, so Lynn is asserting that there are products that are permanent and that never change, that don't change instant by instant, because CDs, she said the CD doesn't change. So that means not all, so she would say that the pervasion is not, so Lynn would, if she were a debater, she would have gone like this and said, I don't accept the premise that she doesn't accept that products are impermanent. She says there are permanent products. So then we would have to determine that, right? They say this is how, and this is how it goes. And I just want to say, this is actually, I just want to share, this is great, because this is what this is how you get valid cognizers, actually, is you debate. That's what, I mean, whether it's, I mean, let's see, it's very good. For anybody, you have to raise all your doubts, right? You have to actually think about them. And I remember like talking to some friends and teachers of mine also who were geshes, and they would say, this is what was great about debating in the courtyard, is that somebody would bring up what you hadn't realized even was a doubt, right, in yourself. And they would keep bringing it up until you could be certain, is it true? Or is it really true that all products are momentary? Is it possible that there's a CD that doesn't change instant by instant? Is it possible that there's a, and like, if you have a metal, I'm going to give it even a simpler example, right? A metal bolt that's sitting in a case, sitting in a hardware store, not being used. Is that changing instant by instant? It's produced, it's a product. Is that changing instant by instant? How is it changing instant by, you have to ask, right? How is that changing instant by instant? What do you mean? Is that really changing instant by instant? I mean, this is good. You see people are starting to, and my point is, this is the process of trying to develop valid inferential cognizers, is you could think you know something, but you have to then, talk with other people, think about it, and see, is there somewhere deep down that I wonder, that I don't fully accept or agree that that there's the pervasion and the counter pervasion. So, I'm just looking at the comments. I guess you guys can see them too, right there. They're all there. And but do you see the point? I guess to me, what's important here, I just want to say, like, because I know we want to stop in a few minutes and all that, and we're not going to try to go further in the text particularly, because I think what's important actually is to get the text is going to get it in order to understand and benefit from what it's saying in the text here, which is like getting at valid proof statements. The important part is the three modes, right? And to think about, oftentimes we think, I guess I just want to keep emphasizing this, right? Oftentimes we think we know something, either we think we know something, but how do we know it? Is it a valid cognizer? Is it a valid inferential cognizer? How certain are you of the three modes? And if there's any shred of doubt about any one of those three modes, then you're not yet the person who can have, right? That's why I like this term, full-fledged person, right? Like it's fully fledged means ready to fly, doesn't it? Right? Like a bird that's fully fledged is ready to fly on that point. And to be full-fledged on one point of that it just means you're ready to realize one thing, right? That doesn't mean you're ready to realize some other thing. So you get the point here, though, is that we have to, and in Buddhism, I emphasize that the idea is that you should keep asking questions, right? Until you're certain. You're not supposed to just accept it, right? That's what the Buddha said, right? Check it like, what was the Buddha say? Check it like a gold what's it called? Merchant. Checks gold, right? They cut it and they burn it and they do whatever. They do all kinds of things to make sure it's real gold, not fake gold, right? Or a diamond person, if they're gonna buy a diamond, right? They look at it under the mic, under like a high-powered thing. Anyway, the point is that for here, for this, so I just want to say, like, for like a homework session or something, just to contemplate the three modes, right? You use the example of sound being impermanent, but then you can apply it to other examples, right? Like, and actually, I want to, like, okay, I want to just challenge that for a sec. Like, it's easy when it's just a name, right? I gave the example of a name. That's easy because it's like anything. As they said, right? If you could change your name and then that's your name, that's fine. But when it's, and we're going to get into this next time about there are different types of signs also, which we'll get. We didn't have time today about. Next time I'll cover that. There are different types of signs. But I'll ask you a question. Like, I'm gonna leave the example to contemplate, and we'll stop in a sec, but the example to contemplate is sound is impermanent because it's a product. Well, I'll ask you a question. Like, think of a relative of yours, right? Somebody you're in your family. Do you have a valid inferential cognizer knowing that you're related to them or not? And I don't know the answer for you. I'm just giving mundane examples here. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. Do you have a valid inferential cognizer that they're actually your relative? Think of your key, okay, to your house. Do you have a valid inferential cognizer that your key will work on your in your lock? And I'm just picking random examples here, but my point is to apply this, it's just trying to get an understanding of what does it mean to be a valid inferential cognizer. And what Buddhism is saying is you can have valid, right, inferential valid cognizers, and they're incontrovertible. But Buddhism is also saying don't mistake things you just think are true for valid inferential cognizers. So I'm getting at, that's what I'm saying. It's complicated, isn't it? On the one hand, it's possible to actually know something in a new, incontrovertible way, but it's also very possible to think you've had a valid cognition about something that you just kind of think is true. And we'll get into later, there's more detail about what I mean by that. There are different ways of knowing, right? But there's an interesting point on that, but we're not going to get to that next time, probably. But I just want to say, like, just to think about that topic, it's like the homework suggestion, okay? And then I forget when the next class is. It's scheduled, and we've got 2 classes in March already scheduled. Now I'm going to schedule. I hesitate to schedule for April because of we thought maybe Ken Rinpoche was going to come in April, but he's not. He's not going to come till later. So I'll schedule for April now. But then Varahi wanted to share something.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that Geshe Gelik, the resident teacher in Kadampa Center, North Carolina, is giving us a teaching at via Zoom at our center on March 11th. It's a Friday night, 7 to 8:30 p.m. on how to develop resiliency during times of stress and hardship. And I just would like to invite you to participate. If you go to the website, you'll see it under introductory classes. So I hope you can join us.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
For anyone who hasn't seen him, he's great. That's right. I spent several years at the Kadampa Center, and he jokes that Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to always talk that he was a true monkey mind. And he's a very entertaining speaker and teacher.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, he is great.
I'll have the reminder for that in every weekly newsletter that gets sent out too. So you'll see it down there up until the event.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, thanks to Ryan for starting to take over the newsletters. They've been great. And thanks to Lisa for starting to take over the posting to Facebook also. There's been two really great developments that are helping the center, I think, quite a bit. So thanks to both of you. Okay, well, let's do our dedication. So, the supreme jewel Bodhichitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you, the source of good and happiness, all powerful Chinrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. I dedicate all these merits, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, so that the I, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, and lead all sentient beings to enlightenment as quickly as possible. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren.
Sure.
Thank you, Lauren.
Fun subject.